The environmental crisis begins with the illusion of the separate self. Look around us. Forests are disappearing. Rivers are becoming increasingly polluted. The air in many cities is growing harder to breathe. Animal species continue to vanish. Climate change is creating extreme weather events that were once considered rare. Most people see this as an environmental crisis. But according to Alan Watts, the problem goes much deeper. He believed that the environmental crisis is not merely a technological, economic, or political issue. It is the result of a fundamental mistake in the way human beings perceive themselves. That mistake is the illusion that we are separate from nature. From childhood, we are taught to think of ourselves as isolated individuals. We have our own names, our own bodies, our own thoughts, our own ambitions. Gradually, we develop the feeling that we are a separate self, existing in a world outside of us. Nature becomes something different from who we are. The trees are out there, the rivers are out there, the animals are out there. The earth is out there, and we are here. Once this division takes root in our minds, the way we treat the world begins to change. If nature is something separate from us, then exploiting it for personal benefit seems perfectly reasonable. Forests become timber. Rivers become resources, animals become commodities. Land becomes a tool for profit. Human beings begin to see the world as a giant warehouse of raw materials created for their use. But Alan Watts argued that this way of thinking is profoundly dangerous, because it is based on a false assumption. He once said, "Man suffers only because he takes seriously what the gods made for fun." Part of that suffering comes from believing that we are separate entities struggling against the world. We forget that we do not stand outside nature, we are nature. Alan Watts often used the image of waves on the surface of the ocean. A wave has its own shape, its own height, its own movement. Yet it cannot be separated from the ocean. A wave does not exist independently. It is simply the ocean expressing itself in a particular form. Human beings are much the same. We believe that we are separate individuals. But in reality, we are expressions of the entire living system of the earth. Without trees, we could not breathe. Without water, we could not survive. Without the microorganisms living within us, our bodies could not function properly. Without the sun, life itself would disappear. Every breath we take is evidence of our connection to the whole world. No one exists alone. No one is truly separate. Alan Watts once said, "You are not a stranger here." These simple words carry a profound meaning. We were not thrown into a strange and hostile universe, we emerged from it. Just as leaves grow from a tree, just as waves arise from the sea, we are part of the ongoing process of nature itself. When we truly understand this, our relationship with the environment changes completely. Because harming nature becomes the same as harming ourselves. Imagine a person using one hand to injure the other. It sounds absurd. Both hands belong to the same body. Yet that is exactly what humanity is doing to the planet. We cut down forests. Then we wonder why floods become more severe. We pollute rivers. Then we worry about rising disease and water shortages. We release greenhouse gases. Then we fear the consequences of climate change. All of this stems from forgetting that we and nature are not separate things. Alan Watts observed that modern civilization often behaves as if humanity is the conqueror of nature. But this is a battle that can never be won. Because if we defeat nature, we defeat ourselves as well. Imagine a cell within the human body that decides to serve only its own interests without regard for the whole system. What happens? It becomes cancer. Cancer grows by consuming everything around it. At first it appears powerful, it expands rapidly, it dominates. But eventually, when the body dies, the cancer dies too. In many ways, humanity behaves similarly. We consume endlessly, we expand endlessly, we exploit endlessly. Yet we rarely stop to ask whether we are destroying the very system upon which our lives depend. This is why Alan Watts believed that the solution to the environmental crisis cannot be found solely in laws, regulations, or technology. Those things are important, but they are not enough. What is needed is a transformation in consciousness, a shift in perception, a realization that human beings are not separate from nature. When perception changes, behavior naturally follows. You do not need to force someone to protect the environment if they genuinely understand that the environment is part of who they are. You do not need to convince someone to love the earth if they realize they belong to it. In that understanding, caring for nature ceases to be a duty. It becomes as natural as caring for your own body. As natural as protecting your eyes or your heart. Alan Watts once said, "Through our eyes the universe is perceiving itself. Through our ears the universe is listening to its harmonies." If this is true, then every human being is more than an isolated individual. We are the way the universe experiences itself. Nature is not something outside us, nature lives through us. The blood flowing through our veins was once rain. The oxygen filling our lungs was created by trees. The atoms that make up our bodies were forged in ancient stars. Everything is connected. Everything belongs to the same unfolding process. Perhaps the greatest environmental crisis is not the destruction of forests or the pollution of rivers. Perhaps it exists within the human mind itself. It begins the moment we believe we are separate from the rest of life. Because once we forget that connection, we begin to act like strangers on our own planet. But when we remember that we belong here, an entirely different way of living becomes possible. A way based on harmony rather than conquest. On understanding rather than control. On connection rather than separation. Perhaps this is what Alan Watts was trying to remind us of. Human beings do not stand outside nature observing it. Human beings are nature becoming aware of itself. In the next episode, we will explore an even deeper question. If everything is connected, why do human beings still feel lonely, anxious, and afraid? What created the powerful sense of a separate self? And is it possible to move beyond that illusion and discover the peace that Alan Watts spoke about throughout his life? Join us in Part 5 as we continue this fascinating journey into consciousness, identity, and our place in the universe.